While Americans had feared the spread of communism since the establishment of the USSR in 1917, the Second Red Scare was a defining portion of the 20th century. Offset by Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe and the communist victory in China, anti-communist sentiments quickly became the spotlight of post-World War II America.
In the background was the growing struggle between two great powers to shape the post-war world. Soviet Russia was expansively stabbing westward, knifing into nations left empty by war. The United States was obliged to help Europe safeguard its traditional freedoms and the independence of its nations.
Since the Soviets had not developed nuclear weapons, the Americans were still leading the arms race.
Well, I guess there's nothing for us to worry about. We're the ones that have the bomb.
However, the shocking news of the first Soviet atomic test reached the American media in late 1949. On August 29, 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first nuclear weapon, Joe-1. As an even greater shock, investigators soon found out that Joe-1 shared many resemblances to the American bomb Fat Boy.
McMahon gives his reaction to Russia's possession of the bomb.
This is no time for hysteria. This is no time for panic. This is a time for a calm reflection on the political and military implications of this transcendent event.
Ignoring the advice of national leaders, the Americans still panicked.
Everybody's worried about the atomic bomb, but nobody's worried about the day my Lord will come, when he'll hit great God Almighty like an atom bomb. When he comes, when he comes.
American intelligence agencies immediately initiated the search for answers. One trail led to American communist Julius Rosenberg, his wife Ethel Greenglass Rosenberg, and her brother David Greenglass.
Both Julius and Ethel were born to poor Jewish families during the late 1910s and were raised in New York City. Julius studied mechanical engineering in college and later served in the Army, while Ethel was a factory worker and hoped to become a professional singer. In 1939, Julius Rosenberg joined the Communist Party. A few months later, he married Ethel, who he previously met at a Young Communist meeting. Alexander Feklisov, a Soviet agent, later recounted that Julius came to the attention of Soviet intelligence in the spring of 1942 and was actually introduced to the KGB at a 1942 Labor Day rally.
When Julius learned that David had been working at the atomic facility in Los Alamos, Julius asked David to provide information to the Soviet Union about nuclear mechanisms.
Klaus Fuchs, an imprisoned Soviet spy in the United Kingdom, made his confession in 1950. In the confession, Fuchs stated that he made contact with an American agent, Harry Gold. A series of convictions followed this. In the United States, Gold revealed to the FBI that David Greenglass had worked along with him. When the FBI confronted David, he confessed that Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were co-conspirators.
Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were tried several times after the conviction. For both, the final decision was the death penalty. The Rosenbergs were transferred to Sing Sing prison and were electrocuted on June 19, 1953.
The Rosenbergs' sentence was much harsher than their counterparts.
Klaus Fuchs and David Greenglass were sentenced for 14 years and 15 years, respectively. Morton Sobel, another co-conspirator, was sentenced for 30 years. Ethel's conviction was even more shocking. Although many evidence demonstrated that Julius had spied for the Soviets, there was insufficient evidence to convict Ethel. When David Greenglass was first interviewed by the FBI, he did not mention that his sister Ethel was a co-conspirator. However, in a later interview, Greenglass suggested that Ethel did in fact participate after the FBI offered to protect his wife and children for such confession. The lack of clarity and firmness in Greenglass's testimony makes the basis of Ethel's conviction doubtful. Items and testimonies used to convict the Rosenbergs were not properly supported by factual evidence. Although Ruth testified that Ethel typed the atomic weapon documents, investigators later revealed that Ruth, rather than Ethel, was a typist. In addition, Ruth and David claimed that the Rosenbergs used a table given by the Soviets to store the documents. However, the table was only identified after the trial, and investigators found it was actually a common furniture sold in Macy's. The court also failed to follow several proper procedures. In 1946, Congress passed the Atomic Energy Act. This new law made it necessary for the jury to recommend execution before atomic spies could be executed. However, in the case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, no jury recommendation ever took place. Instead, they were tried under the Espionage Act of 1917, which required no jury recommendation. The extreme anti-communist sentiment created a sense of urgency that may have affected the court's decision. A dominating theme in the 1940s, Americans during the Red Scare deeply resented the communists.
Communist countries can guarantee you peace.
Why don't you go live in a communist country then? You blow your top on a street corner there? You look pretty well off, sister, to be tearing down the country that gives you freedom of speech.
Hear that up in Washington they're having an awful fuss.
The hysteria of their contemporary time further corrupted the trial. Many people deeply resented the Rosenbergs' betrayal and wished death upon them.
The most disturbing thing of this whole ordeal was Ethel's execution.
When it appeared that she had received enough electricity to kill an ordinary person and had received the exact amount that had killed her husband, the doctors went over and pulled down the cheap prison dress, a little dark green printed job, and placed the I can't say it. Placed the stethoscopes to her and then looked around, looked at each other rather dumbfounded and seemed surprised that she was not dead. Believing she was dead, the attendants had taken off the ghastly strappings and electrodes and black belts and so forth. And these had to be readjusted again, and she was given more electricity, which started again kind of a ghastly plume of smoke that rose from her head and went up against the skylight overhead. After two more of those bolts, Ethel Rosenberg had met a maker, and she'll have a lot of explaining to do.
The conviction and punishments of the Rosenbergs were driven by factors other than their alleged conspiracies. Although Julius Rosenberg was a Soviet spy, the Rosenbergs' trial was set in the wrong time with the wrong people. The combination of fear and communism made the Rosenbergs the unfortunate scapegoat of the Red Scare in the post-World War II America. The lack of solid evidence, the betrayal of family members, the series of misdirected testimonies, and the failure of the court to adhere to its judicious duties further led to the ultimate wrongful execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg.